Client-server architecture. The client-server model is a network architecture where clients request information from the servers and the servers respond. The, a client sent a request to the server over a network which processes the request and sends the response back to the client. The client-server model allows for centralized data management and application services, and it's easy to scale by adding more clients and servers. A browser is a client program that requests the data from a web server, which enables the web page to be accessed by any device with an internet connection. There are several types of client-server networks or client-server applications: one tier, two tier, three tier, and N tier. There are three types of clients: thin, thick, and hybrid. The server-side applications are one-tier architecture, two-tier architecture, or three-tier architecture, or N-tier architectures. Really, the one-tier architecture is like a client application where you just create a client application which has everything in it, like the database, file server, program, whatever you want. It's just one single application. It runs. It doesn't communicate anywhere. It just be installed on the computer and it just runs. So two-tier architecture is there is a client tier, which is actually an application running on your computer, and then it connects to the back end and then retrieves the data. It could be a database tier. So usually it's a two-tier. One is the client, other one is another tier is a data tier, which could be database server or any other server for that matter. Coming to the three-tier architecture, there is a presentation layer, which is a client, and then there is a logic layer, which is a server, and the data is persisted in a database server. That is going to be a database server, let's say. The presentation layer is the one which is actually client, and then it connects to the server over the network, and the server connects to the database over the network again. So it's a three tiers. In the modern applications, or almost all modern applications, are developed using N-tier architecture. It's not just a database. There will be other network services or other services are integrated. So nowadays, all those applications are being developed in N-tier architecture. Understanding the thick versus thin versus hybrid clients. The client is a program which is installed on the computer, and then the client will connect to the server and retrieve the data to render on the client side. Thin client is an application which is not installed uh, uh, on the system, I would say. First, you connect to the server and then get the application and run the application on your end. The hybrid clients are some portion is installed and some portion is downloaded from the server side. It's a mix of thick and thin clients. Thick client example is, let's say you have some program which is installed on your system. Example could be Windows Word, for example. And that Windows Word is installed on your machine, but you may get the Word document from the cloud and then, render the UI. The data is coming from the cloud, but actual application is installed um, on your computer. Thin client wise, if you see a browser is a thin client, and an application running in browser, browsing a web server, web page is a thin client. In a client server model, we need a server to host the server side application. We need a client to run the client side application and access the server. A client sends a request to the server using a network. Server processes that request and then sends the response back. Client and server communication can be done over the network using different mechanisms. TCP socket, UDP socket, HTTP application or server HTTP protocol. It can be a REST service, it can be SOAP service, it can be WebSocket. There are several other mechanisms to integrate a client and server. A client-server applications can have one server and more than one client. At the same time, one client may connect to the more than one server also. To simplify our discussion, one server and multiple clients can be communicated. Client-server applications, N client model, one server sitting on the right side and all the clients connecting over the internet. Here we depicted to mention that a client can be running on a laptop, can be running on a mobile, or can be running on a desktop, but it will connect to the server and communicate the data back and forth. Let's look at the web page, how it works. First, we need a server to host the web application. That's a backend logic, let's say. Then we need a client browser. A browser is a thin application. Browser is an application, thin application, which is going to run a thin client of your application. So you are writing a web application, let's say news application. Then that application will be browsed on the client browser and retrieve the application. It's a thin application, and then the thin client, and then runs and then renders that news on the browser. The client browser needs two modules in it as part of a browser by default. One is the JavaScript engine, second one is the HTML renderer. HTML renderer is responsible for rendering the HTML web pages. JavaScript is responsible for running any scripting involved in the views. So the client browser connects to the backend and sends a request if it needs to get any web page. Based on the request, server understands what page needs to be returned, and that page will be returned back as a response. Here we introduced there is something called HTTP request and HTTP response, two terms we introduced, and that HTTP request uses HTTP protocol. HTTP protocol is application layer protocol. HTTP protocol works on top of TCP IP protocol. HTTP response is the same too. It's possible client browser may be inputting the data to the server or getting the data. Both directions retrieving the data is allowed.